Hey everybody, this is Dr. Vermillion from the EMDR News, and I just want to welcome you back to another episode. Again, we try to get here at 9:30-ish every morning, and it might begin in a couple of weeks or earlier time. Don't know if that's going to help or hurt people, but just wanted to kind of let you know that that's the case. Okay, so in terms of what we got going on, we do have some things happening this coming week. Today, we're going to go over EMDR Phase 2. Then we have some information on the smoking and harm reduction. Again, one of those things close to my heart. So we're going to really kind of dig into it a little bit tomorrow. Then we're going to go over the neuroscience piece, right? Because a lot's happened since the body keeps the score and Dr. Siegel, and a lot's been happening over the past couple of years, and I want to bring people up to date a little bit so that we're not all just kind of stuck with old information that's been discredited or falsified, because there's still a lot of that out there, a lot of woo, if you know what I mean. So I want to bring that back into kind of what we actually know versus what we uh, believe and think, and it would be nice if it were true. We're going to touch on attachment focused EMDR, and I'll give credit where credit's due, and then I'll also talk about some of the issues with that style. Granted, the material itself will be pulling out the points that are really helpful because there are some. Then we have Red Friday. That will probably be pre-recorded because I will be doing military stuff on that day. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Red Friday is we're going to talk about mental health or just have a pre-recorded 9:30 a.m. Live, quote unquote, for you to watch. All right, so let me see. I got to get out of the thing here. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward a little bit. Um, I gotta get rid of that thing over there. Give me 1 second. There we go. Always a learning process for me here over there at the studio. So today we're going to go into phase 2. It's exciting. I believe that phase 2 is under taught basically, and I don't mean that everybody should be in phase 2 forever, that they never get into reprocessing, but I do believe that people get stuck in phase 2, and phase 2 is a fantastic thing, a fantastic tool, and a really nice part of the work that we have. Okay, just a reminder, I can't believe it's already next week. Can you believe it? Is the EMDRIA conference. We're going to go down to Anaheim or over to Anaheim, down and over, depending on where you are, to Anaheim, California. And we're going to go, and it'll be next week, near the end of the week. We do have a trainer day, we being EMDRIA, not me, the EMDR community. We have a trainer day. We have a consultant day, right? So there's going to be a lot of information put out there. We all want to make sure that we move from, our doing it our way, as Don DeGraff might say, to getting back to the research protocol. And again, I push the change for saying the standard protocol to the research protocol to really drill down the idea that the standard protocol is the one that's researched, one that has multiple RCTs over multiple settings with different populations. And if the signal is good, especially with PTSD, right? Well, PTSD is where it's um, highly utilized across countries, across the world, right? We have EMDR organizations in almost every continent. I've heard that we have it on every continent, but I don't know if the penguins uh, and on Antarctica are really into it. I'm sure though. So that's next week. That's exciting. I'm heading out early. I'll be there on this Sunday. Actually, I'm like a whole week early. And yeah, so hopefully I'll see you around. So the other stuff we got going on is September is the ISTSS conference, and then in October is the EMDR Humanitarian Assistance Program conference. The HAP conference, the Humanitarian Assistance Program, will be in South Carolina, right? And the ISTSS conference is in Texas, which reminds me, today I got to get my flight set up for that. right? Got to get that stuff done. Have you ever noticed that flights are really expensive? Usually, like every year, I go down to St. Thomas, and my desire is to move there. But every year, I go down to St. Thomas, and this year, it's like wow, the flights are in the thousands of dollars. Um, I don't know if it's the oil or what's happening there, but it's very expensive. Also, is that everything's booked up. So even though everything's really expensive, people are still doing it. People are still going. Okay, good times. Um, Let me go ahead and switch over there. There we go. And if you do want to, put some comments, ask some questions, feel free to do so as I go through this. And I'm going to go ahead and allow those things to show up on the stage. So your questions and comments, provided they come to this app here, should end up showing up on the stage. Okay, so and phase two, it's interesting because we have the situation where EMDR has 8 phases, a lot of trauma model therapy, like Colin Ross's therapy and such. Basically three, right? Preparation, you do the work, and then it's like relapse and recovery. And we can fit all 8 phases into that 3 phase thing, but at the same time, it's not exactly the same. So when some people are talking about phase two, they're not talking about preparation. They're talking about doing the actual work of working on the memories, working on the meat of the issue in general, right? So for EMDR, it's a little bit different. We got those 8 phases. And so when we look at phase two, what is the purpose of phase two? Anybody? So the purpose of phase two is to get somebody ready to process, right? Preparation. And one of the fun things is to recognize is that we can take somebody that does not meet readiness criteria and say, okay, right, let's do phase two because I have faith that we can probably get them into being ready, right? Whatever that means. So if they can't state shift, we give them the skills in phase two to state shift. If they can't emotionally regulate, maybe we give them the skills to do that. But we could also send them out, right? EMDR phase two can be integrative, where we bring in other therapies, but it could also be, outsourcing to a DBT group somewhere in the community or somewhere within your agency, right? It could be anything like that. All of that is phase two, right? So preparation involves getting people ready by filling in the gaps that we found in phase one. And again, phase one is our history taking, right? We get an idea of what the person is going through, the resources they have, the issues they have, etc. So when we look at the phase two, we're filling those gaps, whatever gaps we find, as well as we can. So we fill the gaps any ways we can. We make sure they can shift states. So we want to make sure that they can move from being distressed to being less distressed in a given situation or moment. We don't have to be perfect with that. Okay. And that's a huge piece with this, right? Is that with EMDR, we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to get somebody to get from distress to being no distress, right? Just less distressed to be able to be in the room enough to do the work. And that's the important part, right? So we need to have them to be able to state shift. And sometimes it's only one thing they need, right? Like one skill, a breathing exercise, a calm, safe state place, whatever it might be, that they have some reliable feelings that it works for them, right? Whatever it is. Now we don't have to do calm, safe state. When we look at EMDR, we have calm, safe state as something that is usually taught, right? However, calm safe state is not magic. And in some of the scripts, depending on where you're looking at them, it says that if this doesn't work for your client, move on, right? Some of your clients have been well resourced. They've gone through therapy for years. And so they might know more stuff about calming themselves or calming yourself in general than you might have. And unlikely given our occupation, but at the same time, they could be it could be experts at self-regulation. So when somebody is highly troubled or maybe has been in therapy for years, it doesn't mean that you're going to need to do phase two forever. They might come with a package of skills already. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So in phase two, we got to fill the gaps. Now we're looking at state shift. We can do any state shift. There's no reason to do calm safe state except for one, and that is sometimes to show the mechanics. Like this is how we're going to do EMDR, right? We're going to set the camera up. We're going to sit this close, or depending on how you're doing it. Here's the light bar. Whatever you're going to do. Ships passing the night. All those jargony vocabulary things that we got. So we can set all of that up in phase two to make sure that they also know what's going on with that. So we also have after state shift. Well, let's sit on state shift for a second, because one of the things about state shift that we want to kind of appreciate is the research behind some of this stuff, right? There is no dismantling studies for EMDR that take safe state out and say safe state does something specifically on its own, right? That is a therapy in and of itself. Yes, we can use it for mindfulness skills and stuff like that, but there's nothing special about safe state. There's nothing special about the container exercise. There's no research that backs up that these things are more special than any other breathing exercise or skill that you bring or the client brings. So just to remember that, some anecdotal evidence, hey, this works. But again, don't uh, get stuck on the person doesn't have a safe state, right? Move on, find something that does work for the client. The other piece is the informed consent. Now, I mentioned informed consent. This is all part of phase two, in my opinion, anyway. In So in phase two, or informed consent, we have this issue where we have EMDR, and is EMDR different than regular psychotherapy? We have given the client information about what they expect in therapy in general. But now when we get into EMDR, do we want to give them a little more information? And we can. It could be very helpful to give the client more information. And it might even fit within our licensing guides, right? So it's not like legal that you have to give people more information. However, it might be more ethical and more appropriate given your licensing code of ethics. So keep that in mind, that let's not just say what EMDR says, right? EMDR says oftentimes, hey, we've been doing this stuff a long time. It's like CBT, it's like PE at this point. Everybody's kind of used to it, so we don't need to do anything extra. However, even in those cases, it might be a good idea, given our guides, our codes of ethics, that we do give a better informed consent specific to the work that we're doing. Many of us are already doing that, but I'm just putting that out there as part of this conversation of phase two. Another piece is adaptive information, right? So what we're trying to do in EMDR a lot of times is to make sure that the client has front loaded some adaptive material. That could be times where if you know my positive event timeline, this is gonna sound like that, right? Um, Times when they overcame adversity, busted through barriers, or demonstrated positive qualities like leadership, bravery, courage, resilience, self-control. Also, there's some military values that wrapped up in the way I say that. Um, but yeah, we go in and we pull as much information we can about what makes them cool, what helped them survive to the age they are today. Right? There's a lot of stuff in there, and especially with military people, it's easy to use a timeline to help people from the military find their qualities, right? Because so what was the decision point at 17, 18 years old to get you in the military, right? It's independence a lot of times, not all the time, but independence might be something, they made that choice for themselves. And then leaving their home might be bravery, courage, et cetera. And then you can just keep going. Was it being basic? Did you excel somewhere? What does that say about you? And you keep going and moving forward with all of that. So the idea is to pull as much adaptive information as possible. One of the reasons that we want to do that is because when we start working on phase three and four, we want that stuff to be more available than it would have been, right? Instead of stuck in the dark recesses of their mind, it's front of mind. It's right there. So hopefully, when they're doing the reprocessing, their brain might jump to it, right? And of course, we do know or believe with AIP, the adaptive information processing model, that um, we do believe that the negative memory that we're working on is held in isolation, separate, with all the same thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations as when it originally occurred. It's kind of locked back there. It does not have access to these things. So even if we do have them front loaded, it doesn't mean that they're going to get into the work that we're doing. On the plus side, you now have a toolbox or a bucket of new cognitive interweaves based on the client's own experiences. So if you did the work with your adaptive material, you have cognitive interweave material. You have stuff that you can use to throw out when the client is stuck and they don't have access to that very next thing that you have done the work already in phase two and gathered. So when you think about the work that we're talking about here, it's not just, hey, let's make sure they meet readiness criteria, do a calm, safe state, and move on, right? Or yeah, I think that's kind of the gist of the way a lot of people are taught, right? Now, this is a whole good, phase, a robust phase of good therapy in general. But for EMDR specifically, this adaptive piece is huge for this. And we even say it in our training, right? They must have access to adaptive material. So we can help with that. As far as research goes, believe it or not, there's not as much research saying that they need to have access to that adaptive material to move forward. However, it does have more uh, signal than more strength than other things like RDI, for instance. RDI is fantastic. Resource development and installation leads in corn. Their work is amazing. It's been very helpful. However, what research is on it? Right, you're going to find little research, so it becomes anecdotal. It becomes something where through the grapevine we know we believe it works and we've had good results from it. But the actual RTCs, the actual dismantling studies, all of these things are not there yet. So we don't know specifically exactly what it is in the RDI process. It's really helping the client, right? We have our assumptions, and assumptions could be, but assumptions are just assumptions, right? So we have to recognize that we could be completely wrong. And that goes with anything that we're doing, right? The AIP model itself is a model. It's not a researched fact. So we want to kind of appreciate that we run on this model and it's an explanatory model that still fits. However, it's not like scientific fact. It's not true per se that there's this information processing thing. It's a belief that we have. It's part of our model and our understanding of how things work. So phase one, you get your history, you get all your memories, you figure out how distressed this person is, getting a good idea of what this person can do and cannot do in terms of handling memories and being in the room, and then we move forward. An interesting thing, though, right, is that PE and cognitive processing therapy, they don't have this phase two thing. Yeah, sure, they have psychoeducation like we do, give some psychoeducation and stuff, but they don't have this, like, prolonged period of, making sure that this person can state shift and all of this stuff. What's that about? Does that mean it's necessary or does it not mean it's not necessary? Like, what do you think? Here, I smell the wood burning. So research is it's not necessary. There's no research that says that there's any benefit to doing a prolonged um, what is that thing called? A prolonged stretch of phase two, right? Doing resourcing and all that stuff. There's no evidence of it. Right? There's nothing that says that. I mean, it's good to know, right, that there's no evidence to it. However, we still do it because we think that it's important to keep people within the window of tolerance. Did you know that there's no evidence that there's a window of tolerance that people need to be stuck in, right? So when we go through all of this stuff, phase one, phase two, it's interesting to kind of be like, okay, what is you know the belief and what is actually grounded in research and science and what we know, right? And this week is going to be an interesting week because we're going to go over the neuroscience and say, okay, well, what's grounded in the neuroscience, right? We're going to have a little bit of a refresh based on what we know now versus what we knew a decade ago, and some of the ideas and thoughts that came up with like the right hemisphere to right hemisphere uh, conversations and stuff that have a lot of the hemispheric stuff has been discounted, discredited, or at least largely discredited, if not completely. So we're going to go through that a little bit. Um, so the length of your phase two should be commensurate only with how long the client needs to demonstrate that they can stay in the room and do the work without a sufficient, without abreacting too much, without losing their ability to have that meta thought or to be able to actually process the material that we're bringing in. And we, again, with phase one and phase two, we can go in there and treatment plan and case conceptualize and hash things up using EMD and EMDR restricted, right? So this is all part of that process is to kind of recognize that, okay, how can we keep this person in the room? How long do I need to do some preparation work in order to get there? PE, I mean, they do psychoeducation, but sometimes they do some breathing retraining, and sometimes they'll work on it. But their ideas and thoughts are different than ours in terms of why they think or how they think that the process works. Um, the I forget his name already. The guy that did Purple Hat Theory. If his name comes back to me, I'll do it. But there's the a naysayer of EMDR, of any therapy like EMDR. That he called it the purple hat theory, where EMDR is just cognitive behavioral therapy, but with a purple hat. And then everybody says, "Hey, look, there's the purple hat. Must be the purple hat that does it," even though cognitive behavioral therapy works fine. Or the other one, right? The other phrase is I don't know who says this one, if it's not the same person, but what works in EMDR is not new, and what's new does not work, right? That was 30 years ago when this all started, or give or take. But at the same time, what are we doing? Is it just do we have a huge prolonged exposure component? And that's a different theory than what we do with our learning theory, our AIP model. That's based on that learning theory as well. So again, with EMDR in phase two, we don't want to take too long. I believe it was Leeds that said somewhere. I guess you can correct me if I'm wrong. But we have to be careful that we are not waiting uh, until we're ready versus when the client's ready. The client's already suffering. The client's been suffering, right? This stuff is there. If you want to keep doing RDI or resource building and keep giving them band-aids and they go away and come back and they have to keep using these band-aids every time they have a trigger, that's okay. But you're prolonging their suffering. You're prolonging these periods where they have this stuff coming out, right? So again, what can we do? We can have them uh, get to the point where they can stay in the room just enough, and start doing the work. And now, this is not to say that with people that dissociate or have high levels of or like psychosis, or basically higher risk people, or people with a lot more symptoms, and that we're not going to prep them. Of course, we're going to prep them. We're going to spend the time that it takes to keep the people in the room. We're going to teach them skills that they can use when they start to distress, whether that's even just noticing it and letting us know so that we can take time to bring them back in the room. Okay, this is all phase two. So if you thought phase two is just, hey, uh, calm, safe state, do they have it? Great. Now move on. That it's kind of feels like the way I was originally taught a long time ago. It's just like in the training environment, it's just that quick. But we want to recognize that there are different things that we are doing as EMDR clinicians in phase two. We are setting up that state shift, making sure they have at least one that they have confidence in. We are making sure they have adaptive material. And we often say that we want the adaptive material to be on the same level in terms of how much as the traumatic material. So that might be a argument for sitting there and being like, okay, we need to spend a little more time in building up resources or building up these strengths and stuff because you have a lot of trauma. However, again, we don't want to waste too much time. So do what you can to get the pile going, but we don't have to be like, okay, they have to be equal. We don't want to be militant about it. We don't want to be too strict because the people are suffering, and we have to move them into processing and out of processing as soon as we can. So you can, and Laura Parnell in her attachment focused EMDR book kind of goes into a lot of fun stuff that you can add into a lot of fun. I just used that word, but a lot of interesting and good stuff that you can imagine adding to that resource build there. So again, you can bring a lot of stuff into the resourcing piece, make sure that the person has the adaptive material necessary to move forward. So, if you've learned a lot, just to kind of go over what we touched on so far, anyway. There's not much research in terms of aspects of these two. It is not supported by any research. Uh, other therapies don't spend as much time in these two and exercises, and they do pretty well. Like prolonged exposure has really good statistics for those that can stay in it, that can stand it. But that's part of it is prolonged exposure doesn't want you to avoid. They want you to get through it, right, and have the brain accommodate for that stuff, that distress, and make its own new lessons based on the fact that they can sit with it. Um, so again, different theory. So we talked about that the research doesn't necessarily support a lot of the stuff that we do. It doesn't mean that we don't do it. It just means that there's no dismantling study and it says, hey, it needs to be done. So we could probably jump into doing EMDR earlier than some of us have been. So what do we want? We want to make sure that the person can stay in the room, that they have the skills to bring them to let us know that they're not in the room, or maybe to help them learn, be able to say, hold on, I need to get grounded or something, and do the work themselves in the room. All of this stuff is positive. If they can uh, do that and feel confident in being like, hey, I need to stop, you can actually install that as a resource too. Like, they're exhibiting control, they're um, standing up for themselves, all of these positive things that you can imagine. We can highlight them. It's not just something that needs to be boiled over or passed over. So we make sure that they have a state shift skill, right? And they could have more. You can teach them a state shift skill every time they come in. You can as it plus up their toolbox, right? Have a lot of stuff in there. So you can do stuff before in phase two. You can do stuff after each session when you do your phase seven, right? It's just do it. We can constantly give them stuff. However, it's not necessarily required according to studies. It's not supported. That needs to happen. And then we want to make sure that we have that adaptive material. And again, for you, it is awesome to be able to sit there and work in phase two and not necessarily know what's going to happen, but you're filling up that bucket full of antidote. You're filling up that toolbox full of tools that can specifically help the places where this client gets stuck, right? Because what you're doing is you're going and finding these positive qualities that they've exhibited. You're identifying these struggles that they've been able to overcome. You're really finding out what makes this person awesome. And then you're using that information in service of their reprocessing, the reprocessing of these most difficult memories, the ones that keep them up at night, that get in the middle of their day and their intrusive thoughts, affect their relationships, affect their ability to work, right? So you're able to grab all of that information. And then your psychoeducation. Listen, everyone, again, this was a long time ago when I was trained, but from what I remember when I was trained, when our psychoeducation was not, there wasn't much, that we tell them that speech that is often in our scripts. Um, just let whatever happens happen, that whole one, right? Or even, sometimes basically giving them an idea of why we're doing what we're doing. We believe that the memories are basically the introduction to AIP to our client is often in our texts in some way, shape, or form. But we don't go into what we're doing in a given minute generally. But we could. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not a secret. It's not voodoo. It's not magic. There's no a manual where you signed a non-disclosure disagreement, something non-disclosure agreement, right? We didn't do any of that. So, sit down, have that conversation, send them to the National Center for PTSD to read what they say on EMDR, send them to EMDRIA to see what EMDRIA says on EMDR, right? Um, have them look up some of the research, whatever you want to do. There's no secrets here. It's all out there. There's a whole book. You read the book. So feel free to sit there and give them the information so nothing's a surprise. Um, And you can even tell them, although that some people would for research, this is probably not a good idea, but for therapy, it might be, it's fine, it's probably fine. And you can even tell them what they might notice, and you might notice things moving away, getting less clear, stress coming down. You can give that information. The reason why I say that, not for research is because, there's a caution, and that caution is that we might be, uh, creating an expectancy on some level, and for the client to eventually just give us what we want, or to basically look for that, and grab good, even though it might not be fully there. We told them what to expect. Um, yeah. So communication, right? It's not take some time. It's okay, right? Create your elevator speech. Elevator speech is a short form thing. There we go. I'm just gonna keep going. On the plus side, I have new technology coming today. It might actually be here, who knows? But a new technology coming today. So these blackouts hopefully will be few and far between if it's not my connection. Um, so I lost my true thought there. But so it's not voodoo. But let them know whatever comes up. It's all good. Just let them know what everything is. Um, Yeah. So there's for the VA, they do have the whiteboard video. They have a regular video with like a real people in it as well. The whiteboard video is like a cartoon basically that you can watch, and it kind of talks about what EMDR does. EMDR right now is still the research best for PTSD. Yes, we know it can work for a lot of different things. We know, but do we have the research to back it up, right? So there is some research, but not as much as for PTSD. And again, PTSD is the elevator speech. So the elevator speech is for anything, right? So if the client comes in for depression, you can be like, listen, this is EMDR. It's been around for a couple decades, and there's a lot of research for PTSD. As a matter of fact, the DoD, the VA, and multiple organizations across the world really put it as a grade A treatment for PTSD. However, we also know that it does work for depression. There's not as much. Um, Research on it right now, but there is some research, and I feel confident in being able to provide EMDR for you for this issue if you're interested. Something like that is a good start, and then you can go into the elevator speech of what it does. Well, it takes a memory, and memories are not magic, right? They're actually physical stuff in your brain, and just changes the way that memory is fired, basically, because we use bilateral stimulation to get the brain's own natural reprocessing methods to start moving. There's also some evidence, even more so now, that we are able to tax working memory, right? So that's a big one that's happening right now in research. So it's well researched, and again, more research is coming out. But yeah, for depression, we definitely have some ability to help you there. So more confidence that you have, the better. Okay, I think let me just take a quick look, see if I with my notes, see if I missed anything. Um, Phase 2 is not where we prove that the client can avoid becoming distressed. Again, they're gonna get distressed, and that's fine. Talked about Colin Ross and trauma metal therapy. So again, the strongest support is with PTSD. There's other research, it's just not as strong for depression and other things as well. Calm, safe state doesn't necessarily have any research that says that it's required or independently necessary for successful EMDR. Uh, that no research that says container imagery prevents adverse outcomes. No, interesting one. No research that says the slow BLS does anything, or at least doesn't install resources. We talked about the window of tolerance. You don't need to be in the window of tolerance. extended, there's no reason for extended stabilization. It does not make EMDR more effective, as far as we can tell. Okay. Phase 2 is part of okay, and then we can always say that. Phase 2 is part of the evidence-based treatment package. Its individual exercises are not independently validated. So it's part of EMDR, which is evidence-based, but the individual pieces, there's no like dismantling study for that stuff. And then AIP, right? It's a model, but it's not neuroscience. Okay, it helps us understand and make sense of what we're seeing, but it's not like fact based. So AIP is our principal case conceptualization model. It's not settled. It's not like settled that this is how memories are stored or anything like that. I'm just going through my notes if you just joined. I'm making sure that I didn't miss anything that might be important. Okay. Oh, I mean, there was research. Like they did, for example, in a randomized trial involving 121 adults with PTSD related to child abuse. And again, this does work with child abuse. And there are some people that say, "Oh, well, there isn't any evidence." I mean, there's evidence, in this one study is just one of those studies that say yes, it can work, right? So they did 8 stare sessions followed by 16 EMDR sessions. And then 16 sessions of immediate EMDR without the preparatory stare phase, right? So they did a comparatory study, and they found that there was no difference in post-treatment follow-up. So the stare didn't do anything; it didn't help per se. But across all conditions, and again, this is why I say EMDR does work for childhood PTSD, is almost 70%, 68.8% no longer had PTSD diagnostic criteria, and that's Van Vliet et al. That study there. There's also one that had PE or prolonged exposure compared to standard PE. Um, okay, PE trial. Oh, standard PE, intensified PE, and then stare followed by PE. So they did that, resourcing phase with stare before PE, and then the other two they didn't. And it did not produce any reduction in PTSD or lower dropout of PE. I think that one's funny, right? PE, you're gonna drop it, gonna drop out anyway. It works for if you can stay in it, but they're gonna drop out anyway. So don't make complexity the justification for extended, indefinite preparation. We talked about PE and CPTs beginning, the psychoeducation and stuff, maybe some breath retraining, but that's really all it is. Um, CPT now, I don't know when you were taught CPT, but now it doesn't require the account, the trauma account. Readiness should be functional. Obviously, if they are currently abusing in a stressful environment, there might be a lot more preparation that goes into that. So we want to accommodate, we want to recognize that we're just talking about like regular preparation. But if someone's in immediate needs of social or like suicide, homicide stuff requiring intervention, of course, that's going to change your phase two. Also, if they have acute mania, delirium, etc., or that, we start all of that. All right, I'm just gonna go ahead and close it out. Let me see this one. So making adaptive information more available, assessing whether the client can access it and planning it for its potential use is what we want to think about with the adaptive material. And I love the adaptive material. The unique added value of auto stimulation again is not established. And tapping it in, if you will, is not established in any research. Hey, I think this works. All right, everybody. I am going to close up shop now. I'm going to put a lot of this information into a post so you can go to EMDR News and you can catch up on what this research is, where it's from, and kind of get a good idea of what I'm saying. And I do try to do that with my lives and everything that I'm doing. Really, is bring you the research, trying to take you away from the woo, the stuff that people say, and everybody like, well, that feels right, so let's move forward. stop emotional reasoning. We tell our clients don't yeah, don't do use emotional reasoning, but we do. We're like, oh, I feel something, so therefore it must be true. So yeah, be careful of emotional reasoning. Okay, so we are coming to the end today, and I want to appreciate you coming in. Tomorrow, again, we are doing tobacco, nicotine, harm reduction. I'm excited. I like that one. Um, in September, I was invited to Lisbon, Portugal, but I'm doing a EMDR training instead because I committed to it and I have a problem breaking commitments to, to go to a beautiful place at a beautiful time, right? um, But yeah, I'm gonna do an EMDR training, and I'm still gonna do, it's a global, a global, tobacco consortium that is, talking about harm reduction and everything. So they're gonna be getting together and, they're still pulling me in. It's just gonna be virtual, because again, it's one of those things that I talk about a lot, with, especially with veterans. There's been a lot of good, changes, right, with the, JAMA. They just came out with their advice, and their advice is to bring vapes and other nicotine replacement type things, e-cigarettes and Zins, into the conversation when you're talking about harm reduction and getting people off combustible cigarettes. So we're going to get into that a little bit tomorrow. And then we have the fun stuff, right? The neuroscience, everybody loves that. And the, exploring the idea, the thoughts behind attachment focused EMDR. All right, everybody. I appreciate you coming. I want to say have a nice day, and I'll talk to you soon.